This isn't some internet rumor, this is my story. One Saturday morning, I walked out to feed my cows and found a full-blown wedding happening in my pasture. White tents, champagne towers, a string quartet playing under my oak trees. And right there, barking orders like she owned the place, was HOA President Karen Whitmore, the same woman who once tried to fine me for ugly fences. When I asked what in the world they were doing, she smirked and said, "Relax, it's community property now." Community property on my deeded farmland that's been in my family for 3 generations. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just rude. She was declaring war. And if Karen thought she could use my land for her daughter's fairy tale wedding without permission, she was about to learn what happens when you trespass on a farmer's patience. Before we get into how I turned that wedding into the mess it deserved to be, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? And make sure you hit subscribe, because the revenge in this story, oh, it's worth every second. My name's Daniel White, and I've lived on this land my entire life. 200 acres of rolling pasture, oak trees, and a red barn that's been standing since my grandfather built it in 1948. I've fixed every fence, milked every cow, and buried every dog under that same sky. This place isn't just dirt to me, it's blood, sweat, and generations of pride. For most of my life, things were peaceful. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and the only noise I heard came from tractors and crickets. But all that changed 5 years ago when the county sold off a chunk of land next to mine. That's when the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association was born, a cluster of shiny new modern country homes filled with people who wanted to pretend they lived in the countryside, as long as it didn't smell like it. At first, I tried to be polite. When the newcomers stopped by to admire the view, I waved and offered them eggs or honey. But most of them weren't the friendly small-town type. They were city folks playing dress-up, buying the illusion of farm life without wanting to deal with actual farmers. And among them, one woman stood out like a weed in a field of wheat, Karen Whitmore, president of the HOA, loud, entitled, and permanently offended by anything that didn't fit her idea of aesthetic consistency. From the first day we met, she rubbed me the wrong way. She drove up to my fence in her spotless white SUV, lowered her sunglasses, and said, "Are you aware your cows are visible from our cul-de-sac? Some of our residents find that unpleasant." I thought she was joking. I laughed. She didn't. That was the first of many complaints Karen filed with the county, and even with me directly, about the smell of manure, about the sound of my tractor, about the rooster crowing at sunrise, and even about the way I stacked my hay bales. She once called my red barn an eyesore that lowers property values. I told her, "Lady, this barn was here before your subdivision had plumbing." But Karen didn't care. She wasn't used to hearing no. Every HOA meeting she ran turned into a mini dictatorship, where she lectured her neighbors about lawn heights, mailbox colors, and even the type of flowers they could plant. Some of them quietly agreed with me that she was unbearable, but they were too scared to cross her. The truth is, she thrived on control. The HOA gave her just enough power to believe she could boss around the entire county, and she loved every minute of it. My property sat just outside the official HOA line, but that didn't stop her from trying to extend her reach. She once left me a printed letter on HOA stationery, mind you, demanding I keep my livestock within acceptable community odor limits. I framed it in my barn as a joke. But things really started boiling a few weeks before the wedding incident. I noticed survey flags popping up near the edge of my north pasture. Neon orange stakes lined up like they belonged to some construction project. I walked over thinking maybe the county was expanding the road. Instead, I found 2 men with clipboards marking measurements. "Morning," I said. "What's all this for?" One of them looked nervous. We're with Maplewood Heights Event Committee. We're just assessing the field for an upcoming community celebration." I laughed again, that same laugh I gave Karen months ago. "This field," I said, tapping the ground with my boot, "belongs to me, not your HOA." They looked at each other and packed up quick. I thought that was the end of it. Oh, how wrong I was. A few days later, I ran into Karen while getting mail at the end of my drive. She smiled, that tight fake smile of hers. "Daniel," she said, "we're planning a little celebration soon, my daughter's wedding. We'd love to have it with a rustic country charm. You know, hay bales, wide open fields, that sort of thing. I'm sure you wouldn't mind helping out your community," I told her politely. "I don't rent out my land. Never have, never will." Her smile vanished. "You're not being very neighborly, Daniel. Everyone benefits from Maplewood events." "Funny," I said. "I don't remember signing up for your HOA." She muttered something about greedy farmers and stormed off, heels clicking against the gravel. I didn't think much more of it until that Saturday morning. That's when I woke up to the sound of generators and music drifting through my window. At first, I thought maybe one of my neighbors was hosting a big barbecue, but when I stepped outside, I froze. Across the pasture, my hayfield was crawling with workers. They were setting up massive white tents. Strings of lights hung from poles. Tables with white tablecloths gleamed under the sunday. I even spotted a flower arch planted right in the middle of my field where my tractor usually drives through. I jumped on my ATV and rode down the dirt road toward them. The closer I got, the clearer it became. This wasn't a small gathering. It was an event. Dozens of people were setting up sound systems, floral arrangements, and catering stations. A man in a polo shirt with a clipboard waved at me as if I were part of his crew. "You're the supplier, right? The hay bales go near the arch." I slammed the brakes and shouted, "I'm the owner, and you're trespassing." That got his attention. He turned pale and stammered something about the HOA, giving full permission. And right on cue here came Karen, dressed in designer sunglasses, holding a latte, strutting through my field like it was her backyard. "Daniel," she said with fake delight, "isn't this just wonderful? A perfect use of all this empty space." I took a deep breath. "Karen, what part of private property do you not understand?" She tilted her head. "Oh, come on. It's community property now. We even mowed part of it for you. My daughter's getting married, and this land looks so much prettier without all those cows around." I stared at her, jaw tight. "Get off my land, Karen, now." She laughed, actually laughed, and turned to the workers. "Ignore him. He's bluffing." That was the moment something inside me clicked. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just smiled and pulled out my phone, recording every single thing she said. Because I knew from that instant this wasn't going to end with words. That evening I called the county office to verify my boundary lines. The clerk confirmed it in black and white, my fence line, my deed, my rights. Karen had no legal claim to a single inch. By the time I hung up, the sun was setting over my field now, half covered in white tents and fairy lights. The cows were pacing nervously, sniffing at the trampled grass. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching as the last of the workers packed up for the night. They thought they'd pulled one over on me. They thought the quiet farmer next door wouldn't fight back. But I had other plans. As I watched the wedding setup glowing in the distance, a grin crept across my face. If Karen wanted rustic charm, I was going to give her a version she'd never forget. And come morning, that field wouldn't smell like roses and champagne anymore. It would smell exactly like what she'd been pretending didn't exist in the countryside all along. Because out here, justice comes in the form of cow manure, fresh, warm, and poetic. By Friday afternoon, the so-called community event had turned into something that looked like a full-scale county fair minus my consent. The closer the wedding got, the more people poured onto my property. White delivery vans rolled through my gate as if they owned the place, caterers unloading champagne crates, florists arranging roses worth more than my monthly feed bill. They had even run power cables across my pasture, looping them through my fence posts. The smell of trampled grass mixed with perfume and hairspray. It was the kind of smell that didn't belong anywhere near a farm. My cows had retreated to the far end of the field, snorting at the invasion. I could almost hear them thinking, "What are these shiny humans doing on our turf?" I parked my pickup near the barn and walked straight toward the mess. My boots sank into the dirt that had once been fresh hay. A young man with slick-back hair and a walkie-talkie intercepted me. "Sir, please step back," he said politely but firmly. "We're on a tight schedule." "Yeah," I said, crossing my arms. "Whose schedule?" "Because I don't remember renting out my farm." He blinked, confused. "You're not with the HOA?" "Nope," I said. "I own the land you're standing on, and you're trespassing." He hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore told us this area was community approved. We have a permit." "Show me," I interrupted. He flipped through his clipboard and pulled out a paper that looked about as official as a grocery list. "Event Authorization, Maplewood Heights HOA, signed by," he squinted, "President Karen Whitmore." I almost laughed. "That's cute. You realize an HOA permit means nothing outside their boundary, right?" he stammered. "You'll have to take it up with Mrs. Whitmore." "Oh, I intend to," I said, pushing past him. And there she was, Karen Whitmore herself, in all her overconfident glory. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, a floral blouse, and the kind of smirk that makes your blood pressure rise. She was supervising workers who were setting up a huge arch covered in pink and white flowers right where my irrigation line ran underground. "Well, if it isn't Farmer Dan," she called out cheerfully. "You're just in time to see the magic." "Magic," I repeated. "Karen, you're building a fantasy on my property. You need to pack up and leave. Now." She sighed dramatically, like a teacher explaining basic math to a stubborn child. "Daniel, really. The HOA voted that this open land serves as a shared community buffer zone. It's for the greater good. Besides, my daughter deserves a beautiful backdrop for her wedding. We all win. We all win," I said. "Lady, my fence is the property line. And that line doesn't move just because you don't like how it looks." Her voice sharpened. This attitude is exactly why people complain about you. We're trying to bring class and value to this neighborhood, and you're stuck in the past with your animals. I couldn't help but grin. Funny those animals never tried to steal my land. She turned away, waving me off like a fly. Don't be dramatic, it's just one day. One day too many. I took out my phone and started recording. The camera caught her yelling at me, the workers hammering stakes, the floral crew digging holes. Evidence. Cold, hard, undeniable. She noticed and scowled. You can stop filming, Daniel. You're being childish. Karen, you're standing on my property. I'm documenting theft of use. That's not childish, it's smart. For a second, she looked unsure. But then she doubled down, as people like her always do. Fine, record all you want. By the time you finish, the ceremony will already be over. I said nothing, just smiled and walked back to my truck. Because deep down, I already knew words wouldn't fix this. When I got home, I called the county land office again, asking them to email me the latest GIS parcel map. Within minutes, I had it black lines, coordinates, and my name printed neatly over the very field they were trampling. I even printed it out and pinned it to the fridge. Then I called my old friend Sheriff Don McAllister. We'd gone to school together. Don, I said, I've got an HOA problem. He sighed immediately. Is it Karen again, bingo? They're setting up a wedding on my property tomorrow. He chuckled. You serious? Dead serious. Well, that's trespassing, but unless they cause damage or refuse to leave when asked, it's mostly civil. You could press charges, but it'll take time. Time's fine, I said. I just wanted to know where the line is legally. He paused. The line's your fence, Danny. You're within your rights to protect your land. Just don't do anything stupid. I smiled, looking out the window at the glowing fairy lights now flickering in my field. Define stupid, he groaned. You know what I mean. No violence, no property damage. Record everything. Already on it, I said, hanging up. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat on my porch, listening to crickets, while my cows shifted restlessly in the distance. The laughter of workers still echoed faintly under the night sky. My field, my home, had been turned into someone else's playground. I thought about my grandfather, who used to say, a man's land is his word made solid. And right then I swore no one, especially not an HOA queen, would take that word away from me. Around midnight, the workers finally left. The tents shimmered in the moonlight, perfectly set for tomorrow's magical wedding. White chairs in rows, a dance floor, a small wooden sign that said, Whitmore Wedding Happily Ever After. I took a deep breath and walked across the field, boots crunching over the flattened grass. The air was calm, cool, and still. I crouched near the arch and felt the soil damp and soft from the irrigation line they'd probably damaged. Perfect. As I stood there under that ridiculous flower arch, I realized something. Karen thought she'd humiliated me. She thought she could walk all over me because I was just a quiet farmer with no influence. But what she didn't realize was that quiet doesn't mean powerless. It means patient. And patience on a farm grows into something powerful, especially when mixed with a little manure. I walked back to the barn, flipped on the light, and stood in front of my tractor. There it was, the big red John Deere, with the manure spreader hooked on the back. I ran my hand across the metal edge, smiling to myself. An idea was forming, half petty, half poetic, and entirely satisfying. I spent the next hour double-checking the spreader, making sure the engine purred like a cat. I even topped it off with the freshest, richest manure pile we had, courtesy of my most productive cow, Daisy. As I locked up the barn, I looked back toward the glowing wedding site one more time. I could almost see tomorrow playing out in my head, Karen's smug grin fading the guests' horrified faces, the bride's shrieks. Yeah, tomorrow was going to be one for the history books. Before heading to bed, I opened my phone and hit record. The camera framed my dark field and the moon overhead. This is Daniel White, I whispered into the mic. And tomorrow the HOA learns what farm-fresh revenge really smells like. Then I smiled and hit save. Saturday morning broke warm and bright, one of those perfect Nebraska days where the air smells like sunlight and soil. Except this time it also smelled like perfume, exhaust, and arrogance. By 7 a.m., cars began flooding the gravel road that ran along my fence. Luxury sedans, SUVs with ribbons on their hoods, even a white limousine that looked way too fragile for farm country. The entire Maplewood Heights HOA had apparently decided to attend. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood on my porch watching as the guests poured out, dressed in pastel suits and glittering dresses. They tottered across my pasture in high heels, complaining about the mud they were creating themselves. Watch the cow poop, one woman squealed. I chuckled under my breath. If only you knew what's coming, I thought. From my porch, I could see Karen Whitmore commanding the chaos like a general preparing for battle. She wore a flowing pink dress and a giant sun hat, barking orders into a walkie-talkie. Her husband trailed behind her, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Get those flowers centered, and where's the cake?" I said. "The cake should be refrigerated," she shouted. As she paced across my field, she didn't even glance at my house. To her, I was invisible, the background character in her little production. That was fine by me. Invisible men make the best revenge artists. At 9:00 sharp, the orchestra started playing. Violins, cellos, and a harp all echoing across my pasture. The music was so loud it startled my cows, who began mooing in protest. I went to calm them, but not before I noticed something that made my jaw tighten. One of the workers had moved my fence posts. They'd taken down a 20-foot section to make room for a better view of the ceremony. My property line erased without a thought. That was it. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was locked in. I walked back to my house, grabbed my camera, and began recording from the upstairs window. Every moment, the guests sitting the officiant, speaking the bride, walking down the aisle, captured in full HD. The perfect evidence. The bride, Karen's daughter, was radiant in a designer gown, though her smile looked stiff. The groom, a lanky man with slick hair, fidgeted the entire time, probably wondering why the air smelled faintly like cows and gasoline. I watched as Karen dabbed her eyes dramatically during the vows, pretending to be some noble matriarch. The hypocrisy almost made me laugh. And when the officiant said, "If anyone objects, speak now or forever hold your peace," I raised my coffee mug toward the window and muttered, "Oh, don't worry, I'll speak later." By noon, the ceremony was over. Guests clapped, music blared again, and the real party began, the reception. Caterers wheeled out trays of champagne, while a DJ started blasting pop songs that echoed clear across the farm. My cows, already irritated, began stamping and mooing louder. I stood at the edge of my porch, arms crossed, watching the madness unfold. One of my bulls, Max, had wandered near the fence, snorting at the commotion. A few guests took selfies with him like he was a zoo exhibit. One even threw him a bread roll. I nearly yelled, but then decided to record that too. Evidence. Always evidence. Around 1:30, a county sheriff's cruiser pulled up my friend Sheriff Don McAllister. He stepped out, hat tipped, low, chewing gum like a man who didn't want to be there. "Morning, Danny," he said quietly, walking up to my porch. "Heard there's a little dispute." I handed him my coffee mug. "You could say that." He sighed. "Karen filed a preemptive complaint saying you were harassing her event." I laughed. "Harassing? I'm on my land. She's the one who turned my pasture into a wedding venue." Don scratched his beard. "Yeah, I figured as much. I checked the parcel map before coming. You're clean as a whistle. So you gonna shut it down?" He looked toward the field, squinting at the 100 or so guests, laughing and drinking. "It's a civil issue, Danny. I can tell them to leave, but you know how it'll go. She'll drag you into court, claiming damages, emotional distress, whatever." I smirked. "Let her. I've got enough footage to make a documentary," Don chuckled. "Just don't make things worse." "All right, no promises," I said, and he gave me that look, half amused, half worried. He left soon after parking his cruiser down the road in case things got out of hand. By 3:00 p.m., the party was in full swing. Music thumped. Kids ran around my pasture. A portable bar served cocktails right next to my tractor shed. I even saw someone leaning on my fence, sipping champagne and flicking the cork into my field. That cork hit one of my cows. The cow kicked up dirt. I swear I saw divine justice warming up. Then came the final straw. Karen climbed up on the small stage they'd built and grabbed a microphone. "Before we toast to love," she said, "I want to thank everyone for coming and for celebrating this beautiful union here at Maplewood Heights' most picturesque location. I'm so proud we turned this old farmland into something truly special." The guests clapped, cameras flashed. I nearly dropped my mug. Old farmland? No, it was my farmland, still is. That moment, her words sealed her fate. By sunset, the wedding wound down, but the reception setup remained for the next day's brunch celebration. That meant they planned to come back same time, same place. Perfect. That night, I sat in my barn under the buzzing yellow light, surrounded by my tools, the smell of hay, and the rhythmic breathing of my cows. My dog Ranger lay at my feet, tail thumping lazily. "Tomorrow's gonna be busy, boy," I told him. "We're gonna clean this place up our way." He barked once, as if he understood. I walked to the back of the barn, where my manure spreader sat, waiting, a wide steel beast attached to my John Deere tractor. I checked the tires, the hydraulic lever, and the feed belt. All in working order. Then I filled it. Every last shovel of the freshest, most aromatic manure I could find, thick, rich, and wonderfully potent after last night's feed. The smell nearly made my eyes water, but I smiled through it. This wasn't just manure anymore. It was justice. By midnight, I had everything ready. I even parked the tractor facing the wedding site, its silhouette looming under the moonlight like a quiet promise. Before heading to bed, I stepped outside one last time. The field was silent, the tents glowing faintly in the dark. My land, my rules. As I walked back to the house, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, Karen, you'll finally smell what you've been ignoring." The next morning would be unforgettable, not for the vows, not for the flowers, but for the scent of justice that was about to roll across the Maplewood Heights horizon. The next morning, the sun hadn't even burned through the fog when I rolled out of bed. The air was cool, crisp, the kind that smells like dew and earth. Perfect conditions for spreading justice. I pulled on my old work jeans and the faded flannel shirt that had seen more farm seasons than Karen had manicures. I poured a cup of black coffee and stepped onto the porch. From there, I could already see the white tents in my field glimmering in the dawn light. The wedding reception tables were still set up untouched from the night before. The flowers wilted slightly, the champagne glasses glinted. It was like a silent battlefield waiting for a reckoning. "Time to get to work," I muttered. Ranger, my loyal shepherd mix, trotted beside me as I walked toward the barn. He wagged his tail like he knew exactly what was coming. Maybe he did. Inside, the smell of hay mixed with diesel and manure, the scent of honest living. I climbed into my green John Deere tractor, turned the key, and felt the engine rumble to life beneath me. The manure spreader attached to the back rattled gently, fully loaded and ready to deliver a lesson in respect. I'd spent hours last night collecting the freshest, richest manure I could find, courtesy of Daisy Max and the rest of the herd. The pile was still warm, practically steaming. Nature's own revenge, organic and effective. I rolled slowly down the dirt path toward the wedding site. The sound of the tractor broke the morning stillness. Birds scattered. A few cows lifted their heads from the grass as if to watch the show. When I reached the edge of the venue, I stopped and took in the scene. Rows of white chairs neatly arranged in front of the arch, a long buffet table covered with white linen. Pink flower petals scattered over the ground. Expensive rental speakers sitting on metal stands. I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I remembered Karen's smirk, that dismissive wave of her hand when I told her to get off my land. That was all the fuel I needed. "All right," I said, gripping the lever. "Let's make it pretty." I eased the clutch forward. The tractor crept into the field, its tires crunching over the soft soil. I flipped the hydraulic lever, and the spreader roared to life. The manure began to fly. Thick, wet, glorious arcs of brown justice sprayed across the field. Over the chairs, across the arch. Onto the tables. Onto the dance floor that had cost them thousands to rent. The smell hit immediately, heavy, pungent, powerful. I drove slow, methodical circles, coating everything evenly. The sunlight glinted off the wet surface like morning dew. Ranger barked happily from the fence line, tail wagging. When the spreader finally emptied, I shut off the engine and surveyed my masterpiece. The once pristine wedding venue now looked like something out of a disaster movie. Brown streaks everywhere, thick puddles under the arched chairs, half-buried tablecloths sagging. It was disgusting. It was poetic. It was perfect. I parked the tractor, climbed down, and walked toward the wooden "Welcome to the Whitmore" wedding sign. It stood there proudly surrounded by chaos. I picked it up, wiped some dirt off it, and planted it firmly back into the ground, but not before hanging my own hand-painted sign underneath. "Private property trespassers, get fertilized." That made me laugh out loud. I took a few photos from every angle, wide shots, close-ups, panoramic, for insurance purposes, of course. My lawyer would love these. By the time I finished, the sun was rising higher, and I could hear faint voices in the distance. People were coming. I walked back toward my porch, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat down to watch. Ranger sat beside me, tail thumping the porch boards. At around 8 o'clock, the first car rolled up a catering van. Two men stepped out, chatting casually until the smell hit them. They both froze mid-sentence. One gagged so hard he nearly dropped his clipboard. What the one said covering his nose. They walked a few feet into the field and immediately turned around. "Nope, nope, not doing this." They jumped back into the van and peeled out so fast they kicked up a cloud of dust behind them. I nearly spit out my coffee laughing. Next came the florist's truck. Same reaction. A few shrieks, some gagging, a whole lot of cursing, and gone. Then came the main event, the wedding party. A convoy of cars rolled up the gravel drive, the Whitmores, the bride and groom, and a handful of guests who must have stayed overnight. They were all dressed up again for the Sunday brunch celebration. Karen was the first out of her car. She wore a wide white sun hat, a coral blazer, and that same smug look that made my blood pressure spike. But this time the expression didn't last. The second she caught a whiff of the air, her face twisted into absolute horror. "Oh, my God," she screamed, clutching her nose. The bride stepped out next, lifting her dress to avoid the mud, only to find it wasn't mud. She froze, let out a high-pitched shriek, and staggered back. The groom swore loudly. I leaned back in my chair, took a long sip of coffee, and watched the chaos unfold like a movie. Karen stormed toward the field heels, sinking into the muck. "What is this? Who did this?" she shouted. I raised my hand casually from the porch. "Morning, Karen," she spun toward me. You animal. "You ruined everything," I shrugged. "On the contrary, everything looks very natural." "Do you have any idea how much this cost?" she shrieked. I smirked. "I'd say about one lawsuit less than you were expecting." Her face went red, her voice rising into a screech. "I'll have you arrested. This is destruction of property." "Funny," I said, standing up and walking toward the fence. "Because according to the sheriff, this is my property. You're the trespasser, remember." She froze. The guests stared, whispering behind her. I held up my phone and played back the video from yesterday, the footage of her declaring that my field was community property now. Her own words, clear as day. "See," I said, smiling. "You gave yourself permission." Her jaw dropped. You planned this." "Sure did. I figured if you were going to use my land for free, I might as well decorate it my way." The crowd started murmuring, a few people, even snickering. The bride was crying, the groom cursing under his breath, and Karen looked like she was about to explode. "Sheriff," she yelled. "Get the sheriff here now." As if on cue, a familiar cruiser rolled up. Don stepped out slowly, surveying the scene with one hand on his belt. The second he saw the mess, his eyes widened, then he stifled a laugh. "Morning, folks," he said calmly. "Everything all right here." Karen pointed at me, trembling with fury. "He destroyed our wedding." "Arrest him immediately." Don raised an eyebrow. "For fertilizing his own field. This isn't funny," she snapped. "He spread that all over our decorations." Don sniffed the air and made a face. "Yeah, well, maybe next time you'll ask before setting up a party on private land." Karen sputtered, speechless. Don looked over at me. "Danny, you got video of them trespassing?" "Sure do," I said, handing him my phone. He scrolled for about 30 seconds, nodded, and handed it back. "Yep, looks like you're clean. Ma'am, I suggest you and your guests pack up before I start writing citations." Karen stood frozen, shaking. Then, defeated, she turned and stomped back toward her car, but not before stepping squarely into a fresh patch of manure. The sound it made was beautiful. She screamed again, the kind of scream that could peel paint. I turned to Don. "Coffee," he laughed. "Make it strong." As the guests fled, the once perfect wedding field was left in ruin, brown, stinking, and silent, except for the sound of flies and distant laughter. By the time I poured Don his coffee, I couldn't help but grin. "Justice," I said, "sure, has a funny smell to it." By noon that day, my once quiet country road looked like the exit lane of a failed carnival. A line of expensive cars crawled away from the farm, every window rolled down guests, fanning themselves and gagging. The smell of victory and cow manure clung to everything like justice wearing perfume. I stood at the fence, coffee in hand, watching the chaos unfold. The air shimmered in the heat, amplifying the stench. The pink wedding arch sagged under the weight of brown splatter. Flies buzzed like an orchestra. Somewhere out in the field, a champagne bottle lay half buried in mud, a fitting tombstone for Karen's perfect day. Karen herself was losing it. Her coral jacket was ruined, her hair frizzed out from the humidity, and one of her heels had snapped clean off in the muck. She screamed into her phone, pacing in angry little circles near her SUV. "Get me the county office. No, the sheriff. The news. Someone has to stop this lunatic." I couldn't help myself. I leaned over the fence and called out, "Having trouble with the smell, Karen. You might want to file a complaint with the HOA." She froze, mid-rant, turned slowly, and glared daggers at me. "You're going to pay for this, Daniel White." "You think this is funny." "Not funny," I said, pretending to think. "Educational." Her daughter, the bride, was sitting in the limo, crying into her veil. The groom stood beside her, red-faced, gesturing wildly as he argued with the photographer who looked ready to quit. Every few minutes the wind would shift, sending another wave of odor rolling over them. It was beautiful. Then, as if things couldn't get worse for them, the catering truck returned, escorted by the sheriff's cruiser. Don stepped out, hands in his pockets, chewing gum with that same patient look he always wore when city folks learned hard lessons. Morning again, folks, he said. Got a few complaints about, well, this whole situation. Karen stomped toward him. Sheriff, this man has destroyed private property. He sabotaged a wedding. He spread manure all over our things. Don raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, we went over this. The property is his. You don't have a rental agreement lease or any kind of written permission from him. Legally speaking, your event was trespassing. This is outrageous, she barked. We're residents. This is a community zone, he chuckled softly. A community zone that stops 50 feet from that fence, according to county records. I checked myself. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her husband muttered something about just getting in the car, but she spun on him. Don't you dare tell me to calm down. I was loving every minute of it. The sheriff turned to me. Danny, I'm guessing you've got video evidence again. I nodded and handed him my phone. He watched the clips, the footage of Karen claiming it was community land, the trespassing, the setup, then handed it back with a grin. Well, he said, guess this case is closed. Karen gasped. You're just gonna let him get away with this? Don looked at her calmly. Ma'am, the only law he broke was creating an unforgettable memory. I almost spit out my coffee laughing. The guests began piling back into their cars, slamming doors, muttering under their breath. The DJ abandoned his speakers, muttering something about never doing country gigs again. The florist refused to touch her flowers, claiming she'd rather burn them than clean them. Within an hour, the entire party had cleared out except for Karen. She stood in the middle of the wreckage, arms crossed, seething. This isn't over, she hissed at me. Oh, I'm counting on that, I replied. Because when it is, I plan to sell t-shirts. She made a strangled sound somewhere between a growl and a gasp, then stomped back to her car, leaving a trail of muddy footprints on the gravel. The door slammed, the tires spun, and she was gone. I looked over at Sheriff Don. You want to stay for lunch? I've got fresh eggs and the sweet taste of victory. He laughed. Nah, I'd better go file this before she calls the governor. Fair enough, I said, shaking his hand. Thanks for letting me fertilize in peace. When he left, I finally let the laughter out loud, long cathartic. My dog Ranger wagged his tail beside me, proud as if he'd helped. Good boy, I said, patting his head. That'll teach them to trespass. By late afternoon, the sun was high, and the smell had mellowed slightly, though I doubted anyone from Maplewood Heights would ever forget it. I spent a couple hours cleaning up around the edges of my barn and setting the fence back in place. Every once in a while, I'd glance over at the field and grin. The wedding site was a total loss. Tables toppled, flowers gone, white chairs stained forever. You couldn't scrub that much karma off with 100 gallons of bleach. And just as I was finishing up, I noticed something, a drone buzzing above the field. At first, I thought it belonged to Karen, maybe trying to film evidence. But then my phone pinged a message from a buddy in town. Bro, are you trending? There's a video of a farmer covering an HOA wedding in Manure. 20K views already. I blinked, then opened the link. Sure enough, someone had recorded the whole thing from the road, my tractor rolling through the field like a tank of vengeance manure flying in cinematic slow motion. The caption read, HOA wedding gone wrong, farmer teaches entitled neighbors a lesson. I couldn't stop laughing. By the time I refreshed, the view count had doubled. By evening, I had phone calls from reporters, friends, even a local radio host who wanted an interview. The clip was spreading faster than Karen's gossip ever could. Meanwhile, the HOA was imploding. According to another message from a neighbor, Jim, a good guy who secretly hated Karen's rule, the board was furious. She never told anyone she was using your land, he texted. Half the board wants her gone. HOA meeting tonight is going nuclear. I poured myself another cup of coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and looked toward Maplewood Heights. Their streetlights glowed faintly in the distance, and for the first time they looked smaller than my farm, not bigger. I smiled. Guess the kingdom's losing its queen. Sure enough, later that night I heard shouting echoing from the direction of the subdivision, muffled voices slamming doors. I didn't need to see it to know what was happening. Karen's little empire was crumbling. And as poetic as that was, the best part was yet to come. 2 days later, I got an official letter in the mail, Maplewood Heights HOA disciplinary notice. At first I laughed, thinking it was one of Karen's final jabs. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't addressed to me, it was addressed about her. The HOA board had voted to remove her as president effective immediately due to misuse of community resources and public embarrassment. It even included a fine for unauthorized use of property and damage to community reputation. I pinned it right next to her old complaint letter in my barn, the one about unacceptable livestock odor. Seemed fitting. By the end of the week, the viral video had over 1 million views. People from all over the country were commenting things like, "That farmer is a hero. Justice smells sweet. This is what happens when you mess with the wrong guy's land." A local news station even called it the most satisfying HOA revenge story of the year. Karen, meanwhile, went silent. No more letters, no more visits, no more pastel SUVs creeping down my driveway. Peace had finally returned to the farm, along with a faint, lingering scent of poetic justice. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the field, my field glowing gold under the sky. Ranger lay beside me, tail flicking lazily. I raised my coffee mug in the air and said, "To boundaries, boy, and to people who learn them the hard way," he barked once approvingly. For the next few days, the phone at my house didn't stop ringing. Some calls were from reporters, others from neighbors, and a few from random strangers across the country who'd somehow found my number through the local paper. Apparently, when a story involves Manure and HOA president and poetic justice, it travels faster than wildfire in July. One voicemail started with laughter and ended with, "Sir, you're my hero. My HOA once fined me for leaving a garden hose visible. Thank you for doing what we all dream of." Another message came from a man in Texas. "Buddy, you just gave every farmer in America a playbook for dealing with Karens." I didn't ask for fame, but I couldn't deny it was satisfying. Meanwhile, the Maplewood Heights HOA was having a full-blown meltdown. Rumors spread through town faster than Karen's perfume on a windy day. At first, they tried to control the narrative, sending out a community newsletter titled "Unfortunate Misunderstanding on Adjacent Property." It claimed the event location was incorrectly mapped due to GPS discrepancies. Nice try. The very next day, my video, the one where Karen declared my land community property now, was featured on local TV. The anchor smiled so hard she nearly cracked her makeup. "Well, folks," she said, "if you ever wondered what happens when you mess with a farmer's land, here's your answer. The HOA board couldn't recover from that kind of exposure." At the emergency meeting held 2 nights later, they publicly voted to remove Karen as president. My neighbor Jim, who secretly hated her guts, sent me a text right after the meeting. It was glorious. "She tried to play victim, but the board showed your video on the projector. The whole room smelled imaginary manure." According to him, the crowd gasped when they heard Karen say, "Relax, it's community property now." Some members laughed, others shook their heads. The treasurer resigned on the spot, muttering, "I didn't sign up for this circus." By the end of the night, Karen's gavel had been stripped from her both figuratively and literally. She stormed out humiliated, swearing that she'd take this to court. And true to her word, a week later I got a thick envelope delivered by certified mail. Whitmore v. White Notice of Civil Action. I'll admit for a split second my heart skipped a beat. But then I opened it, read the accusations, and burst out laughing. The lawsuit claimed I had caused emotional distress, defamation, and environmental damage to community property. She even included an invoice for the cost of the wedding, $47,000. I called my attorney, a sharp old guy named Franklin Pierce, who'd been my legal pit bull for years. I told him the story. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, deadpan, "She wants to sue you for spreading manure on your own land." "Exactly, Danny, that's not a lawsuit, that's a comedy show. Send me the paperwork." 2 days later, Franklin called back laughing so hard I could barely understand him. Her lawyer withdrew Danny. Apparently Karen neglected to mention that there's a dozen videos of her trespassing and bragging about it. "You're fine. Hell, you should countersue for defamation." That idea stuck in my head for a minute, but honestly, I didn't need more drama. Karen had already buried herself deeper than any lawsuit could. Instead, I decided to do something better. I posted my own statement online. To everyone asking about the incident, no, I didn't plan to become a viral sensation. I just believe in respecting property and boundaries. You don't get to take what isn't yours, no matter how fancy your dress is. And yes, the cows are fine. Within an hour, it had thousands of likes and shares. People called it the most satisfying statement ever written by a farmer. One comment said, "You handled that with more class than most politicians." Another wrote, "You should run for HOA president just to disband the HOA." I laughed, but the truth is something had changed. People started treating me differently in town. The cashier at the hardware store winked when I came in. The post office clerk called me the legend. Even the sheriff started introducing me at the diner as the man who won the war without firing a shot. Meanwhile, over at Maplewood Heights, Karen's empire crumbled piece by piece. The new HOA board president, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Mr. Hollis, came to visit me personally a few weeks later. He showed up at my gate holding a pie his wife had baked. "Mr. White," he said nervously, "I just wanted to apologize on behalf of the HOA. What happened was, well, outrageous." I nodded. "That's one word for it." He cleared his throat. We've implemented new bylaws to ensure nothing like that ever happens again. And we'd like to offer to pay for any cleanup or damages. I chuckled. You don't owe me a thing, Mr. Hollis. Consider it fertilizer. The field's greener than ever. He blushed, handed me the pie, and left quickly, probably afraid I'd make him sign something. After that, peace returned. The HOA kept to their side of the fence, and I kept to mine. No more letters, no more drones, no more pastel SUVs creeping up the driveway. But one afternoon, about 2 months later, I was in town picking up supplies when I ran into Karen herself. She looked different, thinner. Her hair shorter, darker, like she was trying to disappear. She was loading groceries into her trunk when she noticed me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she said, "You think you won, don't you?" I smiled. "I didn't need to win. I just needed you to stop." Her jaw tightened. "You embarrassed me. You humiliated my family." I nodded slowly. "You did that all by yourself, Karen." She opened her mouth to reply, then shut it, slamming the trunk shut instead. Her tires squealed as she sped off. I stood there for a while, watching her car disappear down the road, feeling oddly satisfied. Not gloating, not angry, just peaceful. Justice, I realized, doesn't always come from courtrooms or cops. Sometimes it comes from standing your ground, from reminding people that respect is earned, not demanded. A week later, I received a check in the mail, $1,000. It came from the new HOA board marked as Community Goodwill. I donated it to the local 4-H club for kids raising livestock. Figured it was better used teaching the next generation that farmers aren't the villains people think they are. And then came the cherry on top. The county invited me to speak at an agriculture awareness event. The organizer said, "You represent what rural integrity looks like, and your story, well, people can't stop talking about it." When I walked on stage that evening, facing a crowd of ranchers, students, and small-town families, I kept my words simple. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who loves his land. And if standing up for it made me famous, so be it. But I'd rather be known for what I protect than for what I let people take. The crowd applauded. Some even cheered. Afterward, a young farmer came up and said, "Sir, I showed your story to our HOA president last week. He hasn't complained once since." I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped my hat. When I got home that night, I sat on the porch again, the stars glittering over the quiet fields. The smell of fresh-cut hay filled the air, clean, honest, earned. I looked over at the spot where Karen's wedding had once been. The grass there grew greener and thicker than anywhere else. I guess manure really does make things thrive in more ways than one. It's been 6 months since the wedding incident, and life on the farm has gone back to the kind of quiet that feels like peace, not silence. Every morning the sun crawls over the fields, the roosters crow on time, and the cows lumber toward the feeding trough like they always have. The only sound louder than the crickets at night is my old windmill creaking in the breeze. But even with everything calm again, the echoes of that chaos still linger in the air, and I'll admit in my heart, I never set out to humiliate anyone. I didn't wake up one morning thinking, today I'm going to go viral. I just wanted people to respect boundaries, something that seems simple until you're the one being trampled on both literally and figuratively. The grass has long grown back in the field where Karen held her infamous wedding. In fact, it's the greenest patch on the property now, thick and lush, probably thanks to the extra nutrients. Sometimes I stand by the fence and stare at that spot, remembering the chaos, the laughter, and the look on Karen's face when her perfect day turned into a muddy, smelly nightmare. It's poetic, really. Nature always balances things out. A few weeks after the whole ordeal died down, I started getting letters. Not from lawyers this time, but from strangers all over the country. Farmers, homeowners, even city dwellers living under the thumb of their own tyrannical HOAs. They told me their stories about unfair fines, power-hungry neighbors, and absurd rules that made their lives miserable. One man from Florida wrote, "Our HOA fined me $500 for having an American flag on my porch. I fought back using your story as inspiration. Thank you for reminding us that we're not powerless." Another from California said, "They tried to ban my garden. I sent your video to the board with the subject line, 'Remember the Farmer.' They backed off." I pinned those letters to the corkboard in my kitchen. It became a little wall of gratitude, proof that sometimes one act of defiance can ripple further than you ever imagine. Even the local school invited me to speak. The principal introduced me as the man who taught a lesson in boundaries without saying a single bad word. I stood in front of a room full of teenagers and told them the truth. Out here, land is more than dirt, it's memory. It's the story of every callus, every early morning, every storm survived. You can share a lot of things in life, but your respect for what's yours and for what's someone else's, shouldn't be one of them. They listened wide-eyed. A few even clapped. One kid raised his hand and asked, "So, Mr. White, are you and the HOA lady friends now?" I smiled. Let's just say, we understand each other from a safe distance. The truth is, I haven't seen much of Karen since that day in the grocery store parking lot. Word around town is that she sold her house and moved in with her sister upstate. Her property went on the market quietly, no HOA President's Dream Home signs this time. When the for sale notice went up, a few neighbors stopped by to watch, pretending not to smile. I didn't celebrate, but I won't lie, the air smelled cleaner that day. After she left, something changed in Maplewood Heights. The new HOA board actually started doing good things. They built a community garden, sponsored local cleanups, even hosted a farmer's market. Mr. Hollis, the new president, came by again one evening just to say thank you. "Your story reminded us that leadership means listening," he told me, "and that we're guests in this land, not its owners." That one stuck with me. Guests in the land, that's exactly what we all are. Even me. It's funny though. For all the noise, the fame, the phone calls, the interviews, the best part of this whole ordeal wasn't the revenge or the headlines. It was the reminder of who I am and where I come from. I'm not just a farmer. I'm a custodian of something that existed before me and will outlast me. And sometimes protecting that means standing up when everyone else thinks you should stay quiet. I remember the night the local TV station aired a follow-up piece called "When the HOA Met Its Match." They showed clips of my tractor rolling through the field, Karen yelling and the sheriff chuckling beside his cruiser. Then they cut to me on my porch, coffee in hand, saying, "All I did was defend what's mine. You can't build your dreams on someone else's ground." That clip became one of those quotes people started sharing online. Some printed it on mugs. Someone even sent me a t-shirt that said "Fertilize the Problem" in bold letters. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. But, humor aside, I realized something deeper. There's a strange kind of power in quiet dignity. You don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to act with patience, with purpose, and maybe with a little creativity. These days, when I wake up and look out at that field, I don't see the mess anymore. I see a lesson, one that took a few gallons of manure and a whole lot of nerve to teach. I built a new fence along the property line, higher, sturdier, lined with oak posts that'll probably outlive me. On each post, I hung a small wooden plaque that says, "Respect boundaries, grow peacefully." Visitors always ask if I put that there because of Karen. I just smile and say, let's call it insurance. One morning, as I was painting the last post, my neighbor Jim came by. He leaned on the fence and said, "You know, Danny, if you ever wrote a book about this, I'd buy 10 copies. I laughed. "What would I even call it?" He grinned. "Maybe The Day Karma Wore Boots." We both cracked up so hard, I nearly dropped my paintbrush. That night, after the chores were done and the sun dipped below the tree line, I sat on my porch again. Same chair, same coffee mug, same peace. Ranger lay at my feet, snoring softly. The stars blinked awake one by one. In that stillness, I realized how much lighter everything felt. Not because Karen was gone, but because I'd finally closed that chapter. I'd learned something important, not about land, but about people, about pride, about patience. Some folks think power comes from control. But the truth is, real power comes from knowing when to stand your ground and when to let go. So to anyone watching or listening, whether you've got a patch of dirt, a condo, balcony, or just a small space you call your own, here's what I've learned. Protect what's yours, but don't lose yourself in the fight. Stand firm, but stay kind. And if someone tries to walk all over you, well, just remember, grass grows greener wherever you plant your boundaries deep. And sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge or carry a gavel. Sometimes it rides a tractor at sunrise. At the end of it all, this wasn't just a story about revenge, it was a lesson in respect. We live in a world where people think entitlement can replace empathy, where loud voices drown out quiet integrity, but boundaries both on land and in life exist for a reason. When someone crosses them, you have two choices: fight with anger or fight with purpose. I chose the latter. And maybe that's why this story hit home for so many. Because deep down, we all crave fairness. We all want to believe that arrogance gets what it deserves, and that patience eventually wins. So if you've ever been wronged, don't just explode, outthink, outlast, and outgrow. Now tell me, have you ever had to stand up to a Karen in your life? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more tales where justice smells just a little bit earthy.